From being a small colony of farmers to the global superpower it is today, the history of the USA has been nothing short of miraculous. So here is a brief history of the USA from its early beginnings all the way up until the present day. Enjoy. The United States of America, or the USA for short, is a country located in North America. Before it was known as the USA, though, it was known as the 13 colonies. And this is where our story begins. In the early 17th century, European countries began competing for land in North America. At this time, England had recently established a few small settlements along the Atlantic coast, but their efforts were minimal compared to the French, Dutch, and Spanish colonies that were already thriving. England decided it needed a stronger presence in North America, and so began heavily promoting the colonization of the region. Between 1620 and 1640, more than 20,000 British settlers arrived in North America, most of whom were poor and saw little prospect of economic advancement in England. Unfortunately, these colonies struggled at first. The native population wiped out much of the early colonial settlers, while others died from starvation and exposure. However, tobacco cultivation saved the colony, with one man in particular becoming hugely successful. This man was John Rolfe, and he successfully cultivated a strain of tobacco that would later become the cash crop of the southern colonies. By 1640, Virginia had 8,000 colonists and was beginning to expand into the interior. Maryland was also founded in 1632 as a haven for Catholics, while New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, and Connecticut were all founded by Puritans seeking religious freedom. New York was initially a Dutch colony called New Netherland, but it was captured by the English in 1664 and renamed after the Duke of York. Meanwhile, Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn as a haven for Quakers, while Delaware became a refuge for those persecuted for their religion in neighboring Maryland. South Carolina and North Carolina were both established as proprietary colonies owned by private individuals, while Georgia was founded as a buffer state between the other colonies and the Spanish colony of Florida. The early years of the American colonies were characterized by conflict with Native Americans, competition with other European powers, and self-governance under royal charters. Life in the colonies was difficult, but people were generally free to manage their own affairs, with little interference from the mother country. Trade was largely unrestricted, and colonial legislatures could pass laws to regulate their internal affairs. However, this would all change in the 1760s. By the mid-17th century, the American colonies had grown significantly and were becoming increasingly prosperous. However, this prosperity came at a cost as England began to tighten its control over the colonies and extract more resources from them. In 1660, King Charles II returned to power and immediately began efforts to increase royal authority in the colonies. Mercantilism was the economic theory that dominated Europe at the time, and it held that a nation's wealth and power were best measured by the amount of gold and silver it possessed. As such, the colonies were expected to generate wealth for the mother country, and their trade was restricted to benefit England. Tensions continued to rise throughout the 1760s, as the colonies grew increasingly frustrated with British policies. The French and Indian War was a major turning point as the colonies became more involved in the conflict. While the war resulted in the expansion of colonial territory, it also caused significant debt for Britain, leading to new taxes and restrictions on the colonies. The British government attempted to raise revenue by implementing a series of acts, including the Sugar Act, the Currency Act, the Quartering Act, the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Acts. These acts were met with widespread resistance from the colonists, who viewed them as a violation of their rights. The acts placed taxes on goods such as sugar, currency, housing, and stamps, as well as increased the cost of imports. The colonists responded with boycotts, protests, and acts of defiance, which in turn led to increased tensions with the British government. The situation escalated with the Boston Massacre in 1770, in which British soldiers fired upon a crowd of unarmed civilians, killing 5. The Boston Tea Party in 1773 further inflamed tensions when a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships and dumped 92,000 pounds of tea into the harbor to protest the Tea Act. The British government responded with the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, which were intended to punish the colony of Massachusetts. The acts closed the port of Boston, restricted town hall meetings, and allowed British officials to be tried in England rather than in the colonies. In response to the course of acts, the First Continental Congress was held in Philadelphia in 1774 to coordinate colonial resistance. The Continental delegates from 12 colonies met and issued a declaration of rights and grievances. They also organized a boycott of British goods and created the Continental Association to enforce it. The delegates agreed to meet again in May 1775 if the British did not repeal the intolerable acts. However, when fighting broke out between British troops and colonial militiamen at Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress convened. The Congress assumed the role of a de facto national government and raised an army with George Washington as its commander-in-chief. A year of fighting ensued, with the battles of Bunker Hill, Trenton, and Princeton demonstrating the colonists' determination to fight for their independence. In 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense, a pamphlet that argued for complete independence from Britain. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, which outlined the reasons for the separation of the American colonies from Great Britain. The document declared that all men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It also asserted the right of the people to alter or abolish any government that becomes destructive of these rights. The War for Independence lasted for 8 years, with the United States ultimately winning the support of France and other European powers. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially ended the war and recognized the United States as a sovereign nation. The newly formed United States faced many challenges in the early years of its independence. The Articles of Confederation, adopted in 1777, established a weak central government with limited powers, leading to instability and economic uncertainty. However, the government was able to pay off most of its debts and establish a policy of neutrality towards European conflicts. George Washington, who had become a national hero during the Revolutionary War, was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States in 1789. During his presidency, the government under the Constitution of 1787 functioned effectively, setting precedents for future administrations and establishing a stable government. Despite some challenges, including a controversial decision to assume state debts, Washington's 2 terms were marked by significant accomplishments, and the United States emerged as a strong and stable nation. The late 18th century saw the United States grow and develop as a new nation. Territorial expansion brought new challenges and opportunities, while the acquisition of Louisiana doubled the size of the country. The War of 1812 against Britain demonstrated the strength of the young nation and led to further territorial gains. Despite challenges such as economic crises and political disputes, the United States continued to grow and develop, laying the foundation for its future as a global power. As we enter the 19th century, the United States is a vastly different place. Slavery has been abolished, the country has expanded across the continent, and it's now a world power. But how did it get here? Well, that's a story for another video. And that's the end of part 1 of our American history series. How did the USA go from a small farming colony to the world power it is today? Well, that's a story for another video. Check out part 2 of this series for the continuation of the story. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you want to learn more about the USA or world history.